Yeah. Okay. So, welcome to this workshop, which has been reasonably hastily put together. So, the purpose of it really is just to provide a bit of an update around where we are with Three Waters from a sort of a legislative framework, and with a new government coming in, and then to sort of calibrate, okay, what does this mean for us? And then obviously off the back of this, there'll be significant engagement and consultation with the public, because it's such an important matter for us. So this is just a sort of a touch the rock around where are we at today. So Andrew's going to give us a run through a bit of a paper.
Thank you, Chair. And I think that's the important bit. Basically, you would have all seen, and everyone has seen, the issues that councils are grappling with at the moment, predominantly as a result of the changes, as a result of the change in government around what's happening in Three Waters and how they're trying to deal with it. You've seen the government give an extension of long-term plans, which a lot of councils have taken because they don't have a plan to deal with Three Waters. We were in a fortunate position where we were able to deal with that. We've forecast that. We do have a plan to deal with Three Waters, but you've still got in the background the new government saying they have a different proposal and a different approach that they're going to recommend to councils for consideration going forward with Three Waters. And importantly, I think they've put out this challenge, however you want to interpret it, that they will be reviewing councils' plans for Three Waters going forward and then seeing how they respond to that and what they think they need to do, in particular around things like increasing the powers of the regulator. So a lot of the councillors around the table have been through this, and a lot of the public have been through this, but really what's happened in many respects is that you had central government form a view based on a series of reports that they received and come out to the councils and or the public with their solution to the problems that were identified. And what this workshop is really about is having a look at those reports that the government used and saying, well, that was the government's interpretation of the solution that they wanted to impose. Is there any learnings? Is there any information that comes out of that quite good work that was done, to be honest, that we can use when we're forming our plan for the future as to how we set Invercargill City out best to be able to deal with Three Waters? So this workshop really just goes through some of that history, pulls out some of the summaries of the findings of those reports that were used by the government, and then at the end of it, really the only new bit from this council is the question, do we want to continue to look at how best to position ourselves for Three Waters in the future? I mean, you can see we've already done that to date in the fact that we've been able to progress with our long-term plan. I mean, we are being proactive. This is just another question. There's a bit of a flux at the moment where the central government hasn't come up and really identified what the new plan is. They're making a lot of noise and there's a lot of discussion going on. How does Invercargill City Council position itself to make the best decision for itself is really what we're talking about here. So with that, if that makes sense or there isn't any questions, I'll start to go through it. So really the issue around Three Waters, and you'll see that as we go through the slides, and I apologise, there is a lot of information in here, but that's because there is a lot of information. I mean, it's not a simple topic. But one of the issues that drove a lot of this was obviously the health and safety issue, and that was borne out by effectively what happened in Havelock North, and this identification that quite clearly Three Waters has a health and safety aspect to it. And so if you get it wrong, it has consequences for the community, it has health consequences. And so that was sort of used as a bit of a trigger to say, okay, this has serious consequences for the public. Why weren't the things that we expected to be done that led to Havelock North not done, and what do we do to try and fix that? So that was really
just to clarify, so
yeah.
And to dumb it down, which I find often good, so Three Waters is basically drinking, storm and waste. That's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah. Fresh water.
Yeah.
Not drinking water.
Not drinking water. Fresh water.
It's drinking water.
Okay.
Drinking water,
it's
storm
drinking
water.
water.
It's drinking water, storm water,
I think
and
it's drinking water.
yeah.
It's potable water.
Okay. There we go.
Michael, sorry, I seem to have dropped off again. Sorry, we now seeing
And
this
that's
stuff.
the end of the presentation. Onto it now.
So following that, they basically made some findings around what they thought were the key drivers of the issues as a result of Havelock North, and they came down effectively with the regulator not being as strong as they would have liked, the provider not doing a lot of things that we would expect us to do, and really the language they used was a lack of care and diligence. And out of that, they came some issues around, okay, what are the service levels that are expected? So this is the regulator issues and how are they enforcing them? Why wasn't the council in question and the regional council in question doing the work they expected? And I won't say excuses, but the explanation used was that there was cost pressures, there was performance expectations, and so effectively they were doing other things in essence. And so then out of that, they then, so sorry, next slide. They then started a couple of higher level detailed inquiries around solutions. And so you had the Productivity Commission report into, it was broader in that it was local government funding and financing more generally, but in support of that, they requested Capital Strategic Advisors to do a specific piece around how best to fund Three Waters. And so what you see through the balance of the slides is those findings from those two different reports effectively broken down into some of the issues that we need to look at when we're looking at a solution for Three Waters. So if you jump onto the... So obviously one of the issues is just cost. I mean, and everyone can see that. I mean, we're seeing that, and that's what's causing a lot of the pressure at the moment with the councils that are struggling with their long-term plan. It's not necessarily causing Invercargill City Council an issue, but we are seeing increasing costs. We've got some things in our long-term plan that are big numbers. I mean, if those numbers become bigger than they are or change significantly in any direction, really, they have big implications for anyone's ability to continue to provide it. And that's not saying that our long-term plan doesn't allow for it. It's just saying that we all recognise costs are going up. As costs go up, that puts pressure across the whole organisation, driven out of Three Waters. We don't have, and you'll see a number of the issues in here around growth. I mean, at the moment, we don't forecast any growth, but if we did get growth, we'd start to get some of those. You're seeing this play out in places like Queenstown, where they just can't afford to keep putting in the infrastructure to keep up with the growth. A lot of these issues don't necessarily apply to us, but I mean, you can see things like declining populations, not that we've got that, but you see that play out in the regions around us. You can see where it's occurring and you can see how it might impact us, or we need to be thinking about these issues more generally going forward. So again, next slide, sorry. So yeah, look, again, and the other ones obviously that is hitting everyone's agenda is the climate change impacts of growing up as we go forward, and the renewal program, which you've heard Michael talk about, that we're coming through into at the moment in terms of the age of our existing infrastructure and where that's getting to. And you'll see that come in bow waves as people have expanded at different times. So these are just general issues that were identified in terms of the funding and the impact of costs and how those different drivers for costs are playing out across different councils. Yeah. So then the obviously, if you've got costs, the next question that you've got to be able to consider is how you finance it. And so a lot of these reports really deal with how local government can finance itself. And that's where, obviously, in particular, funding and financing and the discussions with central government. Is there a different way to fund it? Is there other ways that council can borrow money? How can council best fund the infrastructure requirements that it have, given the constraints that are set up in the Local Government Act around how we borrow and how much we can borrow and the basis on which we can borrow. So again, these are all just high level issues that we need to consider. And again, we've discussed some of those. So things like user charges, development contributions are all things that we've discussed around the table, and whether or not how we use those to enable ourselves to continue to finance the expenditure that we need to continue to do into the future. So again, that's just more detail. And again, because this was nationwide, you can see they don't all apply to us. So again, the tourism was around certain areas where they've got that as a problem. The central government, the third one, was this responsibility and standards, and again we see that where there is the eternal shift between roles and responsibilities between central government and local government, and who has to do certain things, and the consequence of that always being who has to pay. So there's just some of the high level issues that are coming through. So again, the other one that they looked at was this question of decision making. And really, I think the best way to look at the decision-making question that they struggle with is, or that the reports were struggling with is, it's really about priorities as much as anything else. You can see later on in the slides, we have a look at models around decision-making and information. And again, they're issues that we're addressing for this council. You see that come through, in particular in Three Waters, when we're talking about the information that we have to give you life expectancy of pipes, the monitoring. We're doing all those things where we're trying to make sure that the decision making that we're undertaking is the best that it can. But through all this, and in particular in the Productivity Commission report, you see this tension between funding different activities within council. And that's one of the key parts that comes through with the decision making, and you'll see that come through particularly in the Capital Strategic Advisors piece around how best to ensure that the focus of decision making is enabled, for want of a better description, to deal with some of these issues that are coming up. And again, these are just general comments. And again, it's a situation where at the moment Invercargill is in a good position because of where we're at. We're not really struggling too hard with these, but we do see them, and we saw these play out in what I would say is a very soft way with our long-term plan, where we make decisions around where we were putting certain expenditure, really. And I'm not saying that, I mean, but it's just that tension when we make a decision, where do we put things, and you see that playing out, and we're doing well with it at the moment. And this is more just this sort of goes into, and this is where you end up with some of the recommendations, I suppose, that the last government made, and even this government are looking at. Really, it's around who's making the decisions, and going back to that fundamental, what factors do they need to take into account when they're making the decision. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't take it as a criticism of councils or councillors. It's just, how do you enable or put someone in the position where they can make it's easier for them to make the best decision they can, if that makes sense. It's not that the decision is necessarily bad or wrong, it's just that sometimes we make it more difficult for ourselves than it might need to be, and that's really what they're looking at here in terms of simplifying, for want of a better description, the decision making. And again, as I said, you see that come up in the later slides as to how they try and create a model. So the other issue, and this is really one of the drivers that the came out, and you saw that play out with the Three Waters solution, was all about productivity, and productivity through size as much as anything else. And so they could see the argument, or the bits of this report that were taken out basically said, if we make stuff bigger, it'll be more productive, if you look at it simplistically. And that's where the scale and some of those issues came through. And so again, trying to address the funding and the cost structure by reducing the cost of doing it. So obviously there's two different ways you can deal with that pressure. You can make things cheaper and more efficient, or you could increase your ability to either tax or raise the money to spend it. So this was just an alternative way to skin the same cat, for want of a better description. And that led them through, and as I said, this was in the strategic advisors, really around this decision making and how funding and financing can drive productivity. And it was really, it's quite interesting if anyone's got the time and inclination to read it, as to how feedback loops can work in effectively a public sector sphere, and how they don't necessarily work the best way. And this was a model that, which again is consistent with what we're trying to do, where if you get good information in, then you can get good decisions out the other end. But it was really highlighting that sometimes the the drivers at the front of the decision-making model might not necessarily reflect or be conducive to the best long-term decisions, was really what they're trying to explain here. So if you're interested in it, it's quite interesting. And how you get to being able to make that decision with a public infrastructure asset. So yeah, look, this was obviously when we got down to the funding, and this was about the nature of the asset. So again, we're all used to, and you see this again, this explained later in the later slides. How do you create that structure? You've got certain factors in a corporate or a commercial context. You've got scale. You've got scope in terms of the service of the provisions that you provide. It's a private good, so that you can actually get some revenue for it. This club good, Michael and I had a bit of a discussion around it, whether it's a club or otherwise, but it's this idea that it's not like a commons, it's not like a river. There is an aspect of control over the volume and how much people can actually access. And then you've got obviously the health, the negative externalities. And so given that those are the issues that you've got when you're looking at the business, for want of a better description, what do those drive in terms of your decision making and your business model to ensure that you get the best outcomes is really what that's trying to highlight. And you'll see that come up in the next slides where they then have a look at different models. So given those things, they then compared it to other things that we see and how they're managed and how they play out. So they had a look at obviously electricity, gas and telecommunication, and how those drivers, in terms of the nature of the asset and the business that you would be operating, how those drivers have played out in different sectors, I suppose, if that makes sense. So that you can then consider what model you might want to use to produce the outcomes. So you can see that obviously electricity and gas are pretty similar in terms of the business model, for want of a better description. So they then had a look at the drivers in terms of productivity and commercial drivers that exist in those other areas and whether or not they exist in Three Waters currently. And you can see obviously there are a couple of examples obviously in water care, and you get a similar sort of scenario happening around Wellington but in a different sort of model. How they're the only ones where you've got any of those sort of the drivers and the business model that apply to otherwise similar businesses being applied into a water context. And so it just gives you, well, it gave them food for thought as to what model might be able to provide the services that we're looking for. So then, yeah, and this was where it sort of started to diverge a little bit, because this is where you started to get the recommendations and the outcomes, and this is where you can see where the last government took it and where this government is taking this to play out from the recommendations from these reports. But they're all coming out with their own sort of slant and their own sort of subtle changes, and that's why it's important for council to understand some of these recommendations and say, okay, well, do they resonate with us? Do they make sense for us? How would we look at trying to make sure that we've got Three Waters set up in the best way we can for the community going forward? So they're the sort of outcomes they're looking for. The scale one's interesting, and the interesting part is the second part of that first paragraph, where they basically say scale's important, but forcing scale won't achieve what you want it to. And I think that is really some of the pushback that we sort of saw from the model that was trying to be pushed through, that really just forcing people to merge together just to get scale wasn't working for whatever reason. But again, and you almost see this, and you do see that second paragraph in the press release from the current government. If you don't do it, we'll do something. And it's almost verbatim what they put out in their press release. So again, it's just useful to understand that this is what's driving the government thinking about this, and so we should be thinking about that in terms of what it means for us. So then, yeah, so this is really the question for this council. There is a bit of a hiatus, for want of a better description. There's some high-level suggestion as to where things are going. There's a lot of work going on at a regional and other level around what that means for the different councils. The question is, how proactive or not do we really want to be around examining, given this sort of information, what we think is the best solution for this community and this council going forward, and how do we set ourselves up to try and achieve that, is really the sort of question we've got to be asking ourselves. And if anything, or do we want to sit and wait and see what the central government says and then follow on with what their direction to us is? And that's, I mean, effectively the purpose of this, just to start that discussion, see whether or not there's any appetite to have a look at anything further, and take it from there. So happy with any questions or any thoughts or?
Where do we want to go with this? You know, like, this has been a useful sort of landing point, I think, to bring everyone back to sort of, okay, what are the sort of challenges we're looking into here, and what are some of the sort of historical thoughts and concepts and plans? Yeah, I think we want to be cautious around how much discussion we have today, because you know, it's a really important piece for our community, and so I think, you know, we'll all be at various stages around our understanding of this and what the context of sort of some of the decisions we may have to lean to. So I'm nervous around sort of the discussion becoming solution oriented. So just if you could bear that in mind, in terms of, we will have a discussion, but we're not looking to get decisions about what we're going to do from here. We're looking to certainly open this up and have some very strong engagement with our community, because it is a really, really important, and probably the most important issue we're going to have face us. And so, you know, I think it's really important that we, you know, if there's what other information will we need, how do we see things flowing out, but I don't want to see us land on this is where we need to head, because I just think that just forces us down a track we just don't want to go to at this point. So on that basis, I'll take some.
Yeah, no, just to reinforce that's obviously why it's a workshop. We're not trying to get a decision here. It's more, here's some information. If you want us to come back and do some work, what sort of information would you be looking for, rather than what solution are you looking for?
Okay. So question. So I think, Ringy, you were first, and then I'll go Nobby and then Evelyn.
Yeah, look, I'll just make an opening statement. I've got a couple of comments later, but the first one is around decision making, and I think it's an important one. And they've touched on the ability, and Cameron and Andrew's report to us touched on the ability of elected members to make decisions regarding this stuff. Now, over the 14 years I've been on council, at no stage can I recall elected members ever overturning or denouncing or trying to change any Three Water spending or program or renewal that's come in front of us.
Yeah, from a recommendation.
And we've gone with it, and I guess the staff that presented that report would have got their budgeting done by the finance staff. So as far as that goes, I've never seen us divert any infrastructure spending towards stadiums, museums, you name it, other projects. So can you say that's good decision making? Well, I say not interfering is good decision making, because you're leaving it. And what would say that an independent board of a CCO, which is an option that's in front of us, what would they make a better decision? Are they, you know? So I just want to make a comment on decision making. Over the last 14 years, this council has not stood in the way.
And we've landed, you know, in not a bad place.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Nobby, then Evelyn, and then Tom.
Sure. Quite a few reflections. So I'm quite clear that our responsibility is to the Invercargill ratepayers.
Yeah.
We're not here to be part of a regional or national process if it undermines the position of our ratepayers. Quite clear on that. There's a whole lot of gaps in the report that we've got here that we need further information. So one of the things that's missing is the Morrison Lowe report. So while we potentially take some criticism about decision making, we commissioned several years ago, and Rangi will remember this, the Morrison Lowe report, and the outcome of that report was that Invercargill could flip a coin about whether it joined the then proposed Mahuta DIA process, or we could stand alone. Probably one of the few councils in the country that got that advice to say that we could actually run alone. It's interesting, from where I sit, I get some insight into what we're developing locally with Dunedin at the moment. There's some potential options, and I won't go into those, but just what's being knocked around by way of a potential coalition of councils. We're heading back down the track that Minister Mahuta had us on as well. And for those that were around at the time, I'll just reflect really quickly. There were 4 premises that underpinned the previous government's 3-water push. Economy of scale, lack of water engineers was an issue. Industry capacity had to jump up 200%, and that we had a co-governance model. On all 4 of those, we failed to meet those standards. We couldn't get the 200% out of the industry players. They said they could only upscale 20%, and the DIA's response was, we'll get some overseas contractors to come into the country, which a lot of councils were nervous about. Economy of scale, we went from having 4 entities down to 10, just to give councils a voice. That's all it was. And Minister McAnulty has subsequently said 10 entities is not cost effective. So that includes the Otago Southland potential. That was one of them. Just the economy of scale is not there. Lack of water engineers was a major exercise. It's an international problem. Every council's got problem with water engineers. If we get into going down the same model again, what will happen is we won't have enough engineers. We haven't been doing anything with the universities in the interim, and we'll get our staff poached, not by other councils, but by the industry players who will want them. And they'll pay good dollars to them. And then finally, the co-governance model, we got unstuck with that as well. So I don't want us to repeat that. I think that one of the things we need on the table in the short term is the Morrison Lowe report. It was quite informative. It was specific just to Invercargill in the wider thing. It gave us a good set of eyes for people that aren't aware of that.
Can we get that distributed?
Yep. It was a very good report.
Well,
through Self-Chair, we can get that distributed, but I'll remind Council that the Morrison Lowe was a report that was done based on the previous government's proposal. So that report, while it has some validity in present time and some options, it does reflect on what the proposal was in front of us at the time. So,
and the last reflection I've got is what Andrew touched on about what the current government is suggesting happens to those that don't play ball. My understanding is that the current government, and I've spoken to both the Minister and to Simon Watts, who's the ACT member or spokesperson on this issue, is that they are likely to lean on councils that are not compliant. In fact, all councils will probably be required to put an annual 3 waters plan in, and then the regulator will have the teeth to be able to monitor and get compliance. So you won't be able to walk away anymore and spend money on a museum or on a stadium at the expense of 3 waters. It's my understanding from both those two that we will not be forced to merge with anybody. That's the pathway the last government took by taking away the opt-out provision, and I don't see that as being a threat in front of us.
thank you. Evelyn, then Tom, then Ria.
Just a couple of things. I had to go and look up what club good was, and I don't know that I'm a lot wiser. It's quite a complex thing. Is there a for dummies thing on club good? The other thing was, I know that it's a long time since we've had development contributions, but I see in here that there's mention of that as being one of the tools that some places are using. If we went through a rapid growth phase, and I'm not quite sure how big that has to be to qualify, but would we be wise to revisit the development contribution discussion again? I'm not sure what the pros and cons are, and I think we need to understand that if we were looking at 2 or 3 new subdivisions in a relatively short time, that might put pressure on a particular part of our infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a possibility.
Yeah.
Tom? Oh, hang on. Sorry, Michael, did you want to talk specifically to that?
Yeah, I was just going to,
Sorry.
thank
Sorry,
you, through yourself, Chair, I was just going to give, because Andrew and I had the debate about club goods,
dummies.
and it's the best way to describe it, if you think about a golf club, you're able to, and because it's got the word club in it, it's made it ring for me, you're paying to use the facility. From a water perspective, it's only the only real way you can actually do a club good is in the metered situation. You're paying for everything that comes through the pipe.
Thank you.
There's no other way to do it.
That helps.
Tom, sorry.
Now.
So, I mean, we are in a relatively good position compared to other councils. And I don't think we should see that as a matter of good fortune. I mean, the reason that we are is because wise decisions have been made, over decades in terms of investment in the network. And we've been financially prudent so that we don't have a large amount of debt in Three Waters, or indeed anywhere. We don't have a large amount of debt, and we don't have a huge backlog. We've got work coming up that's going to be very, very chunky, that's going to be done.
Yeah.
So I think if I look at that third dot point up there, do we wish to pursue alternatives? I think if the words were consider options, then I would say yes. Pursue alternatives sounds almost like a kind of rush to find some other solution, and I don't think, we are not on a burning platform. We're not even on a lightly smouldering platform. We're actually in a pretty good place. If there are options that give us, Invercargill, a better outcome, and I'm not talking about anybody else now, I'm talking about us, Invercargill, a better outcome, then of course we must consider them. But again, we're not on a burning platform. We don't need to rush to find something. There are councils all over the country that are desperate to find some solution to get debt off their balance sheet. And we cannot be the end point for that debt, right? Put it simply, we're not going to take their debt. So I think we can afford to take the time. I don't mean just prevaricate. I think we can afford to take the time to look at what options are around. Is it sensible to combine with anybody else? And in terms of, from Invercargill's interests, and in terms of that giving a better outcome in various ways. If the answer is yes, we must consider it. If the answer is no, then I think we can continue to go it alone. When government comes looking for somebody to target, they're not going to come to us first, that's for sure. They've got an awful lot of other people they're going to target before us. And I got to say that, speaking probably to Erin, as I've gone around, and looked at some of the things that our people do, I mean, we've got a pretty neat group of staff working in that area. I know that we've got to be careful we don't lose people, because that's, they could be targeted by other groups. But I certainly don't feel the need to rush to any other solution. We are actually operating pretty well at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so just on that thought, one of the things that comes to mind that maybe we should do is, how fit for the game are we? So people capability and succession of those people, because the competency of our water engineers and other key people that make that system work, how capable is, you know, the providers to do the work, you know, your contracting sort of things, and just do a bit of a sort of précis, where are we at, where are some gaps we may have, so you know, we can make sure our system, which has served us well, can continue to be really effective. And just by doing that, whichever way we go, you know, I think that's a good thing for us to probably have a look at, is just see where we can shore up our boat, you know, and make it stronger, take out any risk around people capability or something like that, you know, so we can continue to have a really well functioning Three Waters delivery. Yeah. Is one of the things. Anyway, sorry, Rhea.
That's okay. That's all right. I agree completely with what Tom's just said. I don't think we should really jump into wanting to look at a pre-arranged marriage with Three Waters. We do have. I mean, when you say, like, do we want you to bring us something to look at? Looking through all the material that our staff have given us, looking at the lifetime of our pipes and our infrastructure, I think in here it says that we've got looking at a 30-year strategy to make sure that our pipes are reinvesting to make sure that we are ahead of them having any key issue within our structure currently. So I think we don't need to panic. I think we're in a really good position. As Tom said, our 4 people that have sat here have put us in a really good place. But I also don't want us to be like complacent either. And I think we should be looking at alternatives. I don't necessarily want to go into a deal with surrounding councils or people that we don't need and that will become a risk to us. I'd rather us look after what we have and we put the needs of our city first with whatever we decide in the future. So I guess one of those things is there's been the call or something's mentioned about a CCO. How would that look? Given our current situation with our own CCO, I mean, how would that look for us? So I'd like to see those options so that we can actually look at it and just be really open-minded.
Right.
Look, one thing history has taught me though, and this is not a good thing, is I don't trust central government. I can quote July 2021 town hall in Blenheim, local government conference. The then Prime Minister, I don't know who it was, stood up and spoke to us and said with hand on heart, Three Waters, each council will have the choice of opting in or opting out. Hand on heart, stood there and said that. And we went, okay, this is good, this is great. And look what happened. So we're getting told one thing now by this government, but it's got a feeling of Groundhog Day that I'm really not convinced. You know, what they're inferring is the status quo is not an option. And fair enough, we can play that game and put forward something. I mean, the key thing really at the end of the day for me is that whatever we go to, we 100% own. We're not in cahoots with anyone. That is the key thing. So, look, I'm just dubious from previous experience not to really trust Wellington. Sorry, I have to say that, but once bitten, once shy.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So is there anyone else that wants to say? Tricia?
This is a huge piece of work. And I think that, I mean, this is a great introductory revisit. But I think we've obviously got to do a lot of discussion at the table. I like your idea, Grant, of doing a stock take of what, review of where the gaps are and things. Yep. But we need some good, discussion between ourselves to see, with informed discussion, to make sure we know where we are going and what is best practice for us. Because it's very important that we do what's right for Invercargill City.
Yeah. So I will come. We've got Nobby and then Rhea, but what I want to come to, and it's probably Erin and Michael, and so where to next? So I'll give you a bit of time to think about that in terms of what do we need to where do we need to go from here? or what the thinking is around if we need to go any particular way. Are we?
Yeah, well, it was remiss of me before not to talk about water meters. And what are we now? Rangi and I have been involved with these debates or these issues with the previous government now for 4.5 years. And we can never get water meters on the agenda. They just don't want to talk about it. And the rationale for not talking about water meters is that about half the population love them and the other half hate them. And so for any council to go down that track, it puts their elected members a little bit at risk. But look, the bottom line is those comparisons that we had from the previous government, some of the information was really helpful. So Auckland currently pays about $800 a year, as we do, for water rates. 10 years from now, Auckland is still $800 because they've got water meters, and we would be about 2,500. So you can do the maths for yourself. So water meters have the benefit, the logical benefit of telling you where your leaks are. Any water engineer will tell you that. And so one of the benefits of that is that we lose in Invercargill about 30% of the product that we treat and put into the system. Now, any system that loses 30% is just throwing money away. If we could get those leaks identified and resolved quickly, then we would save how much we put in the front end. And a classic example of that is Central Otago. They put water meters in about 10 years ago. Tim said to me, it cost us about 10 million to put it in. We recovered in 2 years only the cost of that $10 million in savings. Now, Tim and I don't normally agree on many things, but that was an eye-watering amount for me to realise that. And if you look at all the issues that we've got in Wellington at the moment, they're losing close to 50% of their water. Just runs down a street. Why would you treat water and then let it seep out of the system? So the people that like the water meters are those that are on restricted incomes because they can manage it just as you can with a power meter. At the moment, we all pay the same rate. I can sit here as a solo person in a house, and Evelyn can be sitting there with a family of 8, and we both pay the same water rate, even though she's using 8 or 10 times as much as I'm using. So it's a fairer system, and it allows people on low incomes or restricted incomes to manage those costs. The flip side of it is those that have got the families of 8 hate it because they have to pay for what they actually use.
Yeah,
So
often those larger families are the ones that are on benefits or probably
Sure, yeah.
unfortunate in many ways. So to me, it disadvantages larger whānau groups.
Definitely.
Or multi-generational housing.
Absolutely.
Rhea?
Just a wee question. So we know that our Three Waters networks is servicing a smaller population take than what they were originally built for. So given that thought, if we're looking at the housing needs of our city now and into the future, how will that impact on our waters network with, say, land intensification, whether we go out or we go up, having to look at our district plan, things like that. I think I'd like to see some work done on that so we can have a very informed and a very measured decision or thought process of going through this process with our council. I think those are some really serious considerations. I don't know currently now enough to make any decision on that because I simply don't know the ins and outs, but I think it's been said that we'd be okay with what we've got now if we did have an increased boost in population. But to what degree? So to what degree? So where's that future glance at what we could be networking, our services could be networking with?
So I think you raise a good point. If we think about Te Pūawai down south, the nearest connection for them is fairly close. Same if we went to Donovan Park Farm. There's Retreat Road and other connections close by. If you look at Queenstown, they set up Lake Hayes Estate, which is about 2,000 or 3,000 houses, and it's bloody miles from anywhere. So the whole infrastructure becomes so much more expensive.
Correct, and that's kind of, even though we're smaller, but that large
we're actually larger than Queenstown.
Land size, yes we are. But that's what concerns me, is that land taken to get those services out there for intensification process.
It's a sort of resource that has multi pieces
It has
of
big layers.
the business we do.
Yeah.
Sure, that'll reflect through. Ellen, did you have anything you wanted to add? Ellen's online, just for those.
No, I'm good.
can't
I'm
imagine.
good. I'm still here.
You're all good?
We didn't ask him whether he's got the answer to
Just
that.
there's obviously going to be a few workshops.
What's that? Sorry.
There's obviously going to be a few workshops, a lot of discussion.
Yeah. Okay. Right, Michael and Aaron. What do we do now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll take that one. I'll take it off, Chair. Aaron, for this a little bit. Look, thank you for the comments in relation to the team. I think from perspective of the team that we do have in the water networks here, they've done amazing, and they've been very active in supporting the national-wide transition information that's fed through about standards, etc. So they have been very key in relation to that. With no doubt, the industry has challenges ahead. It's not, when you look at this from a national perspective, not as a Invercargill perspective, there is significant issues in relation to the industry across the country. Having said that, though we do feel some of those pressures from an Invercargill perspective as well, because the industry's only got so much capacity to be able to service across, and that's not talking about our local service provision, that's talking about the ability to do treatment plants and pipe work, etc. Our civil contractors are pressured and stretched. So we've got to take that into mind with whatever options we're looking at, and from that perspective we do need to have a look at what will benefit both the industry but also Invercargill from that perspective. I think from our perspective, we'd rather be a player and help support it. We've already been helping support the industry as much as we can. I'd like to encourage us to continue to do so. So we are a good player in the water industry, and I think we've got a lot to give. I think you've recognised that over the last the last wee bit in the conversations, but also over the many years that have supported the team. So from that perspective, going forward, I think we do need to have a close look at this as a team. We need to be actively working with our partners around. I say partners, I talked about the other councils. If not with them with the solutions, at least helping them with the solutions, because there may be other options than rather going into entities that are available. There are definitely different ways of looking at it. Procurement, for example, having one single source, etc. We've got to look at all options in relation to that, and also work with our industry partners, which we are actively doing as well. So I think next steps for us is we do need to take this away. We already have people actively working in an option space to come back to council. You're very right, this is not going to be a short journey from our perspective, but we do have the luxury, as you've highlighted, that we've got a long-term plan that shows that we can manage for that short period. Standards being as they are at the moment, we have some challenges in the latter period of the long-term plan, and we have been discussing that as we've been out for consultation, so we're very aware of that as well. So we're mindful of what's happening into the future. The other thing I'd add in that, which is in our long-term plan for those that do come along online to our consultation, we've got some money in there for doing some asset information, so we're better informed as well going forward. I think that's critical as well from our perspective to go into the next wee bit on what the future holds for our water entities. And I say water entities, that could be ICC.
Okay, so when, bearing in mind that we're sort of, I think we're collectively saying, look, there's no need for us to panic here and sort of, when's the next likely way we'll workshop work with you?
Through Self Chair, when we say we can't panic, the industry's panicking, so we've got to help support the industry at the same time. We're probably talking the first active component to that was in about 4 to 5 weeks in relation to the first information that we're trying to pull together. We do have people helping support that and working with that, and I encourage us to do so, because if we're not in there, as we've already heard, if we're not in, we can sometimes be brought in. And I think it's better to be in the camp and working with them and working in partnership.
Right.
So I think a month from now,
Yeah.
we will know what the government position is,
Okay.
and we'll know what the Otago Southland position is.
Yeah, so that'll inform the next step.
Yep. I think a piece of information that would be helpful at that workshop would be to know the impact of on Three Waters and what happens if we don't need to have a discharge consent that goes to land as opposed to water. The moment we've factored it in, but the current government is moving on that.
Trish,
I'd just like
Tom.
to suggest if we could have that workshop at a morning fresh time or a time when we're all ready to, and most people are there, it would be really useful.
Yeah, Tom. Last one.
Okay. Michael, I mean, while completely agreeing that we've got to be in the tent at least to understand what the options are, I mean, what I would hope is that in coming back, you don't just come back with one option. In the sense that, I mean, I've said, so I'm quite happy to say again, I'm absolutely against the concept of an Otago Southland entity. I think that we would suffer seriously in terms of service. So what I'm hoping is that when you come back, you look at, for example, a Southland entity as well.
Through yourself, Chair, that we'll need to bring back a number of options. It won't just be one. And because that's kind of our requirement is to do that from that perspective. Yes, I would say there'll be entities, but as I said before, there could potentially be ways we work as well. That could be the solution across the region rather than entities model, or there could be a multiple of entities model. We've been mulling over some ideas in relation to it, but we're not in a position yet to actually formulate those. And we need to work back with the region to check our ideas back with them as well. So.
I mean, look at the forced marriage of Otago South and DHBs.
Through you, Mr. Chair, might I also suggest that we're given more than 2 business days to review any material on this? I think it's such an important piece of our water network that as a councillor I'd like to have more than 2 working days, at least have a minimum of 4 so we can review these materials. You talked about the experience of councillors, well then give us some time to review what you're giving us, please.
My apologies, Council, in relation to that. We decided we were running out of time because we do have an working with the regional council and didn't want this council to be blindsided by that and have some information leading into that. Okay. So hence why the timeline, and I do apologise for the short notice.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. We're done.